Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. While Halloween is meant as harmless fun with costumes, candy, and movies, at the core of the holiday is one of mankind's most primordial emotions, which is the subtitle of today's review. I'm taking issue with an unlikely pairing in Ghost Rider/Captain America, Fear, as they contend with a villain we've yet to see featured on this show, a Scarecrow that isn't from DC. Let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads. But we're scared. Get it? Because it's Halloween and... just roll the opener. The cover is actually pretty good. Our hero's dramatically advancing on Scarecrow. It's an extra long wraparound, with the other half of the front portion showing a close-up of the antagonist brandishing a pitchfork in front of a house. Girl Scouts, sell your cookies at your own peril. The back cover features two police officers, whom we'll get to know as the story goes on. Written by Howard Mackey, with art by Lee Weeks, Al Williamson, and Gregory Wright, we begin with a prologue. Doctors operating on a man, as they have several times over the past few months, and one of them chooses now to raise ethical questions. Does this patient really need Beanie Babies surgically grafted to his torso? Another doc points out they've been paid for this job, and what's done is done. They can discuss moral implications on a Caribbean beach.
I'm in charge, and I don't care about your opinion.
He'd like to wrap it up, since their sedated patient, our main villain, Ebeneezer Loughton, has creepily had his eyes open this whole time. His insurance won't cover any mishaps unless he actively sees them happen. Even more fun, he's very much awake, too, seeing the surgeons as pretty green packages, like the presents his mom gave him when he was good. So he slips his hand free of the restraints, grabs one of the nearby scalpels, and proceeds to open them up and let out the fearful things inside.
Naked.
After his slaughter, he thanks his mom for the nice presents and asks to have his birds back and to open up Captain America in exchange for being a good little scarecrow. Did you finish your homework and eat all your vegetables?
Yes.
Did you send that apology letter to that nice Jonathan Crane boy?
No.
Then no eviscerating superheroes until you do, young psychotic man. A week later, hostages are being held in a grocery store in Brooklyn. By low, low prices! I'm kidding. They're held hostage by dangerous criminals. With one employee already dead, SWAT officers are waiting to move on Lieutenant Gordon's orders. Jim Gordon's here too? He moved universes and cities and got demoted? Yeah, obviously different guy with the same last name. Kinda like Scarecrow. Imagine that. Anyway, he's advising his captain, Jerry Dolan, that the perps inside are drugged up and they can't risk the hostages' lives if they start feeling hopeless. Look what they did to the cashier! The one cashier the store still had on payroll after getting 8 self-checkout scanners. The parent company will see this loss as a good way to save $14.26 an hour. Dolan knows the stakes, but he's counting on the arrival of a certain biker showing up, so he can apprehend him as well. Cue the intro of Ghost Rider, specifically Danny Ketch, roaring past the cops and crashing through the storefront, vowing that no more lives will be lost tonight. As the captain gives the order to move in, wanting the rider's head, our demonic hero confronts the gunman, shooting the links of his chain at them when they threaten the hostages. He singles one of them out, whom he can sense took the cashier's life, and attempts to use his penance stare, an ability that inflicts the target with all the pain they've dished out to others. But the guy is apparently so drugged up that he just spits in Ghosty's lack of a face. So he tries another tactic, throttling the killer and asking if he's contemplated his own death, if he's ready to die like his victims.
Ack! Ack!
Hey, we already did a Mars Attacks crossover last week, the third one this year. No need for a callback. He tosses the gunman aside, telling him to think about it, as he won't take his life. Tonight. Old Fireskull then tends to an old man, meaning him no harm, but the guy seems to be suffering from a heart attack. Police storm in and hit the rider with a barrage of bullets, sending him into a cooler, and his narration lamenting that regardless of his actions, he's seen as a villain by those who should be his allies. But his night is officially ruined when he sees a discontinued tag on his favorite Ben & Jerry's flavor. He hops back on his bike, asks why the police are so afraid of a skeletal vigilante with demon powers that they would resort to violence, and rides off. And if that inner monologue didn't seem clueless enough, Captain Dolan berates his lieutenant, asking how his highly trained SWAT failed to capture a single individual, who again has demon fire powers.
You are a fistful of stupidity.
Gordon doesn't have an excuse, save that he was trying to prevent casualties, like when a hostage got up in their line of fire. As the paramedics are sent in to see if they can do anything for the heart attack victim, the lieutenant suggests to his captain that maybe Ghost Rider is on their side, but Dolan isn't buying it. The next day, Danny Ketch is reading in the headline that the vigilante biker scared the old man to death and throws the periodical in frustration as his girlfriend, the police captain's daughter Stacy, walks in. "What's the matter, Dan? They cancel Calvin and Hobbes or something?" Hey, do not joke about that. The world needs the witty observations and youthful shenanigans of an imaginative grade schooler and his anthropomorphic tiger now more than ever. And yes, I say that knowing that the comic strip ended a couple decades ago. My point still stands. Ketch figures that the old man could have been scared by the hail of gunfire, and that the writer is just a scapegoat for the cops and newspapers to overlook Scarecrow's rampage, which has claimed a third victim already. Stacy is surprised by this, figuring Danny also considered Ghosty a criminal, but ever since being attacked by the villain Blackout, he's changed, become scarier than before, perhaps on par with Flameskull himself. She awkwardly leaves because she's on duty soon. Seriously, I'm not sure if she's supposed to be mad at him or what. And leaves Dan alone with his bike, as he contemplates how he's seen things no one should through the writer's eyes, his life built around fear, his own and others. We get one panel seeing the surgeons' bodies being found by a group of unnamed men, one doctor managing to survive after a week, but probably doesn't have long, and will be taken to a medical team. Meanwhile, under mayoral pressure, the police commissioner is telling Dolan to devote his full attention to apprehending Scarecrow, despite the captain's objections. When that's done, he can go back to tracking Ghost Rider. "Sure, Loughton's killed a few people, but that inflamed biker double parked at an Arby's. Are we just going to ignore that? Does the law mean nothing?" On a rooftop in Brooklyn Heights, Scarecrow talks to his mother, wondering why Captain America has avoided him, if he hasn't gotten the messages he's left.
Okay, a couple of those voicemails sounded a little desperate, but that's no excuse. He could at least send a text.
No, the messages were those people he killed releasing their fear. Spotting a couple on the street, he decides to leave another message, summoning his crows to him. Because of what his unknown benefactors did to him, releasing his own fearful thing, the birds don't get near him, but they still follow his commands, attacking the couple until the villain arrives to taunt them that they can't run from the fear inside, trying to get out through their racing hearts and rebellious muscles, then impales them with his pitchfork. Stacy and her partner Ray happen to be in the area, and as the killer advances on them, Ray, appearing to be more seasoned, opens fire and Stacy follows his lead, as it's declared a righteous shooting. Must not have been that righteous because they managed to miss, like he just danced out of the way of the bullets. Those Michael Flatley YouTube tutorials are finally starting to pay off. He tells the cops how his doctors made him like this, as the two officers begin panicking, so scared they can hardly breathe, which isn't a problem for long where Ray is concerned, as Straw for Brains stabs him and chucks him over the car, a couple of yards at least, like a bale of hay. Yeesh. He targets Stacy next, but simply knocks her out, mistaking her for his mom who left years ago. Figuring the latest message will surely get Captain America's attention, he and his pets leave. Back with those mystery figures, they inject the last remaining doctor with something to keep her alive long enough to give info about Ebeneezer. We then return to Danny, unable to sleep and looking for something his fiery alter ego can handle, reflecting on how he's no longer as scared of it as he used to be. When a police car speeds by, the medallion on his bike glows. He transforms, and it's not only still pretty painful for him, the change gets kinda graphic. "Gah! I don't know what Nicolas Cage was laughing about! Ah!" Stacy and Ray's car was left with straw lying around, and "Oh Captain, my Captain" written in blood on the side doors. Someone asks Dolan if it's for him, that somehow Loughton knew that Stacy was his daughter. Weird thing is, the dialogue which asks Dolan a question looks like it's pointed to Dolan, instead of the cop at his side out of view in this panel. Weird. Anyway, we finally get an appearance from the Star-Spangled Man, saying the grim missive was meant for him, as he has unfinished business with Scarecrow. He lent me his Dead Poets Society DVD a couple years back, and I keep forgetting to return it. Rogers' first duty is to exposition, While he doesn't know why Loughton has become fixated on him, he notes that in their last meeting, in issue 280 of Cap's title, the villain claimed to have been abused as a kid, but that was discredited by his brother, Ralph.
That's impossible.
He goes on that Ebeneezer idolized and was very close to his mom, who was an alcoholic. Her drinking led into periods where she herself would become abusive to young Loughton. But you just said his claims of being abused were discredited. Did his brother lie? Or did Scarecrow say he was abused in one way, but he was abused in a completely different way? If either of those is the case, why not point it out? Or leave it out of the conversation entirely because it just becomes confusing. After his parents divorced and Mama McBoozer left, never to be seen again, Ebeneezer went into serious denial over how she treated him, transferring all blame to his dad. And since becoming a supervillain, some psychiatrists believe that Scarecrow has further transferred his hatred onto Cap. Unsure why Stacy Dolan was taken, he's intent on finding them both, and that's when Ghost Rider is seen on a nearby rooftop. By sheer coincidence, he picked this neighborhood to record his next stunt for TikTok. As Dolan is uncertain how to proceed, Commissioner's orders and all, Cap takes initiative and makes his way to the roof. "Freeze, mister!"
That's Mr. Freeze to you.
He's not afraid of the Rider, preferring to judge someone by deed and not appearance, nor does Steve think he's a criminal or killer as he's been labeled. He also mentions something about vigilantism, that he abhors it, but like everyone else in the costume crime fighting line of work, oft misunderstood by the public, he's been called a vigilante as well. "But I wear bright primary colors, so it doesn't count when I do it." Knowing the cops are closing in, Ghosty says they fail to see he's here to help, avenging the dead innocents, but he won't let them get in the way of stopping Scarecrow, who has someone important to one close to him. Asked to assist, Cap hops on the firebike, and they ride off just as officers make it to the roof.
I'm the spirit of vengeance, and welcome to Jackass.
Meanwhile, Stacy wakes up tied to a cross, facing a guy with a pitchfork calling him Mommy. This exact scenario is why I don't drink. Don't want to black out and wake up to this. Scarecrow claims to have brought her home to take care of her, and that doctors gave him the power to let the fearful thing out of people, so she doesn't have to drink anymore. This all leads Miss Dolan to pass out. Elsewhere, a group of guys in suits elaborate on the success of Loughton's operation, allowing him to produce a mutated pheromone to induce sensory overload and panic attacks to anyone within 20 feet of him, as well as making him much stronger. One man in shadow demands he be found, given all the money they spent to have him work for them.
He'll be the best TSA agent we've ever had.
We return to our heroes, Cap asking where Ghosty's motorcycle gets its power from. Surprisingly, a combination of wind and solar. That remains unknown to the writer, like his existence and quest for vengeance, mysteries that scare his human host, and Skull en Flambe himself. Steve says that facing fear is necessary to move forward, but Ghosty replies his only fear is Scarecrow killing again. Again with the confusingly contradictory dialogue. You can't say you only fear one thing right after admitting you fear something else too. As to how to find Straw Breath, Cap says the Loughtons lived in a Brooklyn Heights brownstone when he was a kid, probably why he comes back to the area, and points to a murder of crows that'll help pinpoint their master. "I should have mentioned that to the police when I was telling them everything else about Scarecrow, but they didn't have a cool motorcycle with flame wheels." Arriving at the house, the captain will use the front door since he's the one the villain is after, and will be a diversion so Ghost Rider can get their prisoner out. And I'm sure their enemy won't hear that demon cycle making its way up the side of the building to the roof. How stealthy! Cap walks in and calls for Ebeneezer to show himself, then blocks an attack from his pitchfork. Unlike that other Ebeneezer, Loughton prepared for the arrival of Captain of America Past. He's also got something in store for Captain of America Present, which would be Sam Wilson, and Captain of America Yet to Come, which is basically Bucky with a fake old man beard because budget cuts. At first seeming defeated, Scaresy demonstrates his new superhuman-level strength, tackling Rogers out the front door, and Winghead realizes how he's reacting. Heart racing, nervous system supercharged.
Can't go on describing symptoms much longer.
I'm feeling scared. Why? How? Did I leave the oven on at home? Do I have peanut butter stuck to the roof of my mouth? Am I actually standing in my 5th grade class in feety pajamas while forgetting my homework? This affects his strength and reflexes, barely able to avoid impalement as he's knocked down. Even standing up is a chore as the villain tries to release his fear and gift him to Mommy. Fortunately, Ghost Rider intervenes, using his chain to grab the killer all the way up to the roof.
Yoink!
Yoink!
As Rogers begins to recover, Police Captain Dolan arrives, having used his detective skills to find the brownstone. Steve tells him to call for backup, and Stacy might still be alive. Not sure why he looks so angry while saying it, maybe because he's recovering from the pheromones, but moving on. On the roof, Scarecrow's fear pheromones have no effect on the skeleton man, who threatens him with the pain he's caused others, and knowing the true meaning of fear. But Loughton sees fear more as a friend, or a pet. And yet you never bother to scoop. When he promises more killings, more fears released, the rider gets a boost of righteous anger, grabbing his foe by the throat and declaring he can't be allowed to kill any more innocents. Against the ledge, Scarecrow sees Cap enter the house after Stacy, so slips from Ghosty's grip and slides down the chimney like the psychotic contortionist he is. Hey, that's Santa's territory! You'll be ho-ho hearing from some not-so-jolly lawyers, mister. Unable to fit, and lacking any Yuletide magic, the rider does the next best thing, using his chain to rappel down and through a lower-story window, narrating that vengeance isn't deterred by fear, nor can it be released to float away. Vengeance crushes all fear. What's the number of his anger management counselor? Asking for me. Obviously, I'm asking for me. Despite Cap suggesting he stay outside, since Loughton would be too strong and he'd be one more person to protect, Dolan has made his way inside the house to see numerous people slain in a room, their mouths stuffed with straw and blood strewn everywhere, making him overwhelmed thinking about such a fate befalling his daughter. In another room, the rider sees much the same thing, and wonders if he'll be able to keep from ending Scarecrow for what he's done. After Dolan is spared perforation thanks to Cap, the rider finds the villain about to release Mommy's fear, and goes on the offensive. Since Loughton's mind's too cuckoo banana nutters for his penance stare to have any effect, he initially opts to just end the madness the old-fashioned way, but finds himself unable to follow through with killing him. Dolan, on the other hand, arrives with Cap, sees straw in his strung-up daughter's mouth, and determines she's dead, deciding to bust a Cap and Ebeneezer himself. Yet Ghost Rider stops him.
She must be avenged by something more than death.
Well, sure, but I feel in this situation if he did that, people might mistake him for a Jehovah's Witness. Fortunately, Stacy spits out the straw, making it clear she's still kicking. As they proceed to untie her, Scarecrow gets angry and charges with his pitchfork, which is grabbed by Captain America, who subsequently relieves him of the weapon and throws him across the room in one move. It'll come to no one's surprise that Captain America won the gold in the supervillain toss event at the Superhero Olympics. Loughton gets up, figuring he doesn't need a pitchfork to rip the fearful thing from them, and I'm guessing this panel of his crows implies he'd use them, but they're not seen advancing on our heroes or anything. A shot rings out, a bullet seeming to go through Loughton's head, fired from Stacy Dolan, saying the villain is under arrest. He was just grazed across his forehead as he promises Mom that he'll be better and she needn't hurt him anymore, after he releases her fear. Possibly a sign he's recalling the reality of his abuse in some small way. As the rider chains his ankle, Ebeneezer says out loud how he'll slip free and escape through the window, as he proceeds to do so. Unfortunately, he falls onto the metal fence outside, impaled on the spikes, getting a taste of his own twisted medicine. Which is further ironic because he's not the Scarecrow-themed supervillain that's also a doctor.
Once again, Dr. Jan Itor. Dr. Jan Itor.
Since Ghosty just tried to stop him, and he jumped of his own volition, vengeance is served, and the rider's conscience is clear. I wonder if that's on fire too. Sometime later, backup arrives, with medics tending to Stacy, and the coroner needing a couple of hours to sort through the house full of corpses before he can remove Loughton's body from the fence. Cap asks if Dolan has changed his mind about Ghost Rider, having let him leave and all, to which the cop says he's not sure. At a cemetery, Danny Ketch is visiting his sister's grave, apologizing for not visiting more often, given all the stuff that's going on, and how much he's changed. He sees a commonality with Scarecrow's urge to release people's fearful thing, and how Danny's fears are released whenever he transforms. As he rides out of the graveyard, he knows everyone, including Stacy and her dad, still fear the rider. We close on an epilogue, where Scarecrow is, inexplicably, still alive, lifting himself from the fence and chatting with his mom. I guess the police are still super busy as the mystery suits arrive, lauding the work those doctors at the beginning had accomplished. They deserve some bonus pay, and oh, right, they're dead. More money for me, then. The one in charge introduces himself as Stern, and tells Loughton that the firm has use for his skills, and that there's much more fear to be freed, as the comic ends. That was Ghost Rider / Captain America, Fear, an emotion they sure did talk about a lot. Maybe they weren't going for anything deep or cerebral here, which, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Though the back cover does talk about Cap having to fight his fears to face Loughton. He kinda did, but only once, and it was artificially induced. He got overwhelmed by the influence of the pheromones, not knowing what was going on, and while he did fight it, the writer helped by pulling the villain, well, out of the cooled-off frying pan and into the skull on fire. When he attacks after Stacy is freed, the fear doesn't seem to affect Steve as before, since it seems fairly effortless for him to throw the contortionist aside. If someone can grow accustomed to the pheromones that quickly, that would seem to be a flaw the firm didn't account for. To better show the effectiveness of Scaresy's new abilities and better portray a continued struggle with them, it'd have helped if we got some internal dialogue from Steve about feeling the fear again, but since there are innocents to protect, a madman to stop, that pushes him forward to summon the strength to win. Like in that Tom King run of Batman, that being afraid is an opportunity to be gallant.
I understood that reference.
You can kind of understand the writer's internal fear. He's treated like an enemy by those he's helping, and if he goes through with outright killing someone, that would be like validating people's fears about him. If he's so apprehensive about it, I guess his threat against that gang member earlier was more of a bluff. Yet when he's faced with someone much worse, like Scarecrow, whom citizens might actually applaud being taken out, he finds he can't do it, for some reason. They don't delve into it other than implication of him being pushed too far, becoming what he fights, which would be interesting to explore. He's a spirit of vengeance, which is characterized as responding to a wrong out of a desire for justice, and offing Ebeneezer could be viewed as revenge, which is retaliation more rooted in malice or anger, for personal satisfaction. Again, I don't know if the writer was going for that, because there seems to be a lot left unsaid, and the word fear and its synonyms are thrown around so much, it seems like the main purpose was to justify the title. It makes sense that most people would be afraid of a biker with a perpetually burning skull and supernatural abilities, but Captain Dolan seemed more motivated to catch him as a criminal, not out of personal trepidation. Unrelated note, because Captain America has spent much of his life pummeling Nazis, I'd like to think that were the penance stare used on him, it'd feel like a full-body shiatsu massage. Even if it wasn't meant to be overly deep, it's still a fine read. While Cap can read so formal and proper that it's like he's mimicking Data from Star Trek, his interactions with the writer are well done, and Scarecrow was a great menace, very unsettling and visceral. And I say that as a guy that's not really big on horror stuff. The dialogue did get a bit confusing a couple of times, contradicting itself over something after a panel, but it's pretty minor. I thought the art was fine, no big technical problems from what I saw, very nicely fit the morose tone of the overall story, including some excellently rendered expressions, and the rider's bike looked pretty cool burning across the city. One could argue it's not overly graphic since it hides a lot of fatal attacks or grim imagery in shadow or off-panel, yet it can be very bloody in some scenes, so not something to recommend for very young readers. While I'm not a fan of horror or gore, and I'm not very familiar with this villain, this story was still pretty good, and you can see why I ultimately decided to review it for Halloween. And it does get me thinking how this Scarecrow might interact with his DC counterpart, outside those couple of panels from DC vs. Marvel. Seems Ebeneezer would be Crane's dream patient. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.